Good afternoon. It's Tuesday, the 12th of June 2018, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. Your host today, Mike Robinson, myself, Brian Gerrish. Trump.
It's happened, hasn't it? And the BBC really hacked off about it as well, judging by their coverage this morning. So the 12-second handshake is what the BBC said, and they were hugely impressed, as I've just said. So, this has happened. They've signed a document. Some people at least saying that this is an historic meeting, and Trump is saying that, and in fact Kim saying that North Korea are going to be denuclearizing very quickly. Kim saying it's a major change. So this is all going on. They did not quite the same sort of gay dalliance that between Trump and Macron, for example. So they weren't holding hands as they moved around the place, but they did shake hands, and they did sign this document. The document is a joint statement by the President of the United States and Chairman Kim Jong-un of the Democratic Republic of Korea, and as I say, it makes various commitments. Now, of course, and perhaps not unsurprisingly, quite a number of people saying that this is a non-binding agreement, and that, of course, in the past, North Korea has ignored non-binding agreements. Some people are taking a pretty pessimistic view. Mostly people that are involved in the mainstream media that are normally promoting war in recent months and years, and we're really hoping that North Korea was going to be a suitable bogeyman for us.
I'm not sure I get a lot of confidence out of the fact that Trump has visited and now suddenly North Korea is going to back down, and therefore the Americans are going to have even more power in a way.
No, I don't think that's fair. I think this has been going on for quite a long time, and South Korea and Japan have been heavily involved in this, and China as well, in trying to get to this point. Yes, Trump is doing the typical Trump thing, being the front end of this, yeah. but a lot of people have been involved in this, trying to bring North Korea back into the fold, we wait and see what happens. But no, I think this is probably quite a reasonable move, and we should be looking at it reasonably positively, I think.
Okay, that's good.
Yeah, perhaps we can't say the same for Brexit, and that shenanigans continue. This is a big week for Brexit. This isn't literally a quote from David Davis, but it's more or less what he said. I didn't threaten to resign last week. It's nonsense, he said, honest. He didn't threaten to resign, but in the meantime, as we mentioned yesterday, the Great Repeal Bill is in the Commons this week. Theresa May absolutely panicking about whether any of the amendments that have been pushed through by the House of Lords are likely to get any support in the House of Commons. David Davis has told Conservative MPs that the approach that the Tory party has taken with the EU is going to be undermined unless people vote the right way in the next. So anybody that's considering rebelling against Theresa May really is going to be causing big problems. It looks like maybe she's sorted that problem out, because last night she seems to. Now, she didn't. Again, this is another piece of fake news on screen at the minute, because this photograph comes from a Mansion House speech last year. But I thought it was appropriate because this is tantamount to what she did. She
put on the
red dress. She got down on bended knee and begged the Parliamentary Conservative Party at the 1922 committee to please don't put me in a bad position by voting for any of these amendments that the House of Lords have put in. So she got down on her knees and begged. And apparently a compromise amendment has been pushed forward using different language. They're not talking about a customs union. We're talking about some kind of customs partnership. Is there any difference? Not really. But who do you think was the person that helped broker this compromise, Brian? Who might have been? Well, it was Oliver Letwin.
Good.
Yes. What do we know about him?
I think he's extremely slippery, not to be trusted, and if he's involved in it, then there's some dirty dealing, would be my opinion.
Okay, well, we'll have more to say about that in due course, but we'll watch with interest what happens over the Brexit bill this week. But in the meantime, as we spoke about yesterday, Theresa May was very pleased to announce on Sunday that the G7 leaders had agreed to establish this rapid response mechanism. And I just want to reiterate what this is, because it is really pretty spectacular. The key points here: coordinated attribution of hostile activity. So the rapid response mechanism between the G7 leaders, or is it? And perhaps it's between the G6, because the United States may not be involved in this, but the G7 will have a coordinated attribution of hostile activity. So in other words, if the United Kingdom comes up and says that the Russians, ate Theresa's cat, that everybody will say that the Russians ate Theresa's cat.
Yeah.
That's what's going to happen. And then that's going to be followed up with joint work to assert a common narrative about Theresa's cat and a response to the eating of Theresa's cat. And of course, the mainstream media will be absolutely fully involved in that. Now, it's quite interesting that Theresa May gave a briefing on the G7 summit to the House of Commons yesterday. And she mentioned the rapid reaction mechanism. Sorry, the rapid response mechanism. Did she mention either of these key bullet points? Absolutely not. It wasn't mentioned in the House of Commons yesterday in terms of coordinated attribution of hostile activity or joint work to assert a common narrative. So is that tantamount to misleading the House by omission?
By omission, yeah. When I read that, Mike, what my mind says is this is common purpose. This is working to a common purpose. There is going to be no independent view, no independent national view. There is going to be the secret meetings followed by the common purpose, and then they'll do whatever's been decided behind closed doors.
Well, it's pretty good timing, because just at exactly the moment the G7 was apparently signing this, German media was pushing out this article, which is reporting that the German government has zero evidence from the British that Moscow or that Russia was behind the poisoning of the Skripals. So this is pretty unfortunate timing that this should happen. This should come out at the same time. So apparently the German government informed a parliamentary oversight committee during a closed hearing that it still has not received any evidence suggesting that Russia might well be behind the incident, which took place obviously in March. And this is according to the German television station RBB. It is still only known that the poison used in the attack was a nerve agent called Novichok, which was once produced by the Soviet Union, is the quote. But unfortunately, they have no further information. So I appreciate the rapid reaction mechanism. It's a new thing. It has not in a position to be deployed yet, but clearly this is the type of thing that Theresa wants to avoid in the future.
Yeah, because she didn't quite get the story to stick.
No.
That's the big problem. So we need a common line, a common purpose, so that if the British government creates another street theatre incident, then we can be sure that all the other European countries will toe the line. Although personally, I don't think that's going to happen, Mike, as perhaps the Germans are showing.
Yes.
Well, let's focus on the power base, and the power base, of course, is money. It is the international banking cartel. And I have to say that this gentleman, Noel Edmonds, has been doing a lot of extremely good work. UK Column has received quite a lot of information about his good work over the last few months. Some of it we couldn't speak about at the time, but more and more is coming into the public domain. So the BBC article here gives a little bit of it. Noel Edmonds seeks 50 million damages for HBOS fraud. I thought this was a useful headline, Mike, because essentially the BBC seems to be pointing a finger at Noel Edmonds, saying, well, he wants to claim half of the £100 million compensation pot that's been created. So the BBC sort of digging at the banks, but not much. They're pointing a finger at Noel Edmonds.
Attacking their own, as it were, and to a certain degree.
Well, I think attacking anybody who dares point a finger at criminals inside the international banks. But if people are not aware of this story, I encourage you to research and find out as much as you can, because Noel Edmonds has really taken lead position in challenging the banks as to what's been going on. And this YouTube clip you can find, it's entitled Noel Edmonds at Lloyd's AGM, May 24th, 2018. And he's getting stuck into the bank, not only on the fact that, of course, his and other people had their money stolen, but the banks are not honouring their promise to actually compensate.
And in his defence, if the BBC is going to attack him in that way, we should remember that he is not chasing this compensation on the basis of money that was stolen from him personally alone. He had a business, he was employing people, it destroyed people's livelihoods and people's jobs. And of course, his point in this video that you have on screen at the moment was that if we look at other banking scandals, the amount of money that was initially set aside to compensate people for those banking scandals was a fraction of the amount of money that was ultimately needed to meet the proper levels of compensation that were required. So the BBC can make a claim that he's trying to take half of the pot. He's maybe talking about half of the pot as it's currently defined, but that pot is going to grow because, of course, Lloyds is only one of the banks that was destroying people's businesses at that time.
Yes, indeed. And let's have a look at what he said in that video. And I only took this out of the first few minutes because it was so impressive. He said, "I'm a Lloyds shareholder. I've been asked by other shareholders to put questions on their behalf. Your bank, that should be, destroyed my business. Over 100 people lost their jobs. Lives were destroyed. And as you've done with thousands of small and medium-sized enterprises, we were groomed, we were pillaged, we were destroyed for millions." So that was pretty crunchy. And he went on to say this. He mentioned his particular company, Unique Group. He said, "I lost millions. You actually stole millions from me. Last year I listened to you and your chief executive promising a swift and fair compensation for all victims, but that process has not materialised." And I've added, "nor has the police investigation, arrests and trial of similar ongoing fraud and corruption in the wider banking system materialised." So the important thing here is that many people at the moment are exposing fraud in the banking system. That may be over toxic debt, but it is also over the fact that many mortgages or the whole mortgage procedure is fraudulent, money not being loaned, money being created at the time that the mortgage is itself is created. And we now have people who have been hurt to the tune of millions of pounds also starting to experience these problems within the banking system. And the important thing is that people like Noel Edmonds have had the courage to actually stand up and be counted in challenging the banks. So if you're not aware what's going on over this, please have a good look, and also have a look on the wider internet for the people that are now speaking out about the whole fraud around mortgages. And many people are challenging this on an individual basis. I think we're going to see a lot more of this, Mike, because of course we're now starting to get whistleblowers from within the banking system itself.
Absolutely. Okay. NATO has announced the Trident Juncture exercise, just another exercise for later in the year. This is Trident Juncture 18. All allies, as well as partners Finland and Sweden, will participate in NATO's largest military exercise in recent years, which is going to take place in Norway in October. Trident Juncture 18 will have an Article 5 scenario, so this is collective defence, and will be under the command of Admiral James G. Foggo, Commander of Joint Force Command Naples. At a press briefing yesterday, he gave the media an idea of what the exercise is going to be about. 40,000 participants, 30 countries. The sheer size and scale of the exercise gives Norway as host nation an excellent opportunity, they said, to realistically train reception and support of substantial Allied reinforcements, and NATO gets to test their plans for the reinforcement of Norway. In sum, this strengthens our common capability to handle a crisis should it ever come to that. We might say that once again this is further provocation at Russia, but we don't need to worry because here they are at the press briefing. And what did they say? NATO is a defensive alliance. We're not looking for a fight, but we're committed to defence and deterrence. That's what this exercise is all about, training to defend and providing a deterrent effect, ready to respond to any threat from any direction at any time. So we should be reassured by that.
Well, or this is actual double speak, and of course everything they are doing is antagonistic to the Russians at the moment. Perhaps we could also add, though, that the American military itself is having problems. A little while ago, all of their B-1 bomber fleet was grounded due to problems. We got problems with the F-35, and perhaps more dangerous for the American military is that they've clearly got problems with manning and training. And we reported last week the collisions that have taken place with Pacific Fleet ships. We now have been told that actually there won't be court-martials in some of those cases. There's just going to be a sort of inquiry. So the report seems to be that major problems with training and experience inside the US fleet are gently going to be pushed aside. We don't want the truth to come out about why these fatal accidents have been happening. Interesting stuff.
Okay, well, perhaps we don't need to worry because, of course, we won't be fighting on real battlefields in the not-too-distant future. We'll be fighting in cyberspace. And, of course, NATO has been taking the lead on this with the cooperation of the European Union, and Jens Stoltenberg and Federica Mogherini have been pushing this forward as a key policy area for quite some time now. But Cyber Phalanx 2018, another exercise this time. This is to enhance cyber resilience of common security and defence policy missions. So that's good. This is a European Defence Agency effort in cooperation with the Ministry of Defence of Austria and the Multinational Capability Development Campaign. So this is a combined cyber course and exercise designed to train military planners and staff of common security and defence policy missions and operations to cope better with cyber threats. It was held actually over the weekend in Salzburg in Austria, and as I say, it aims to strengthen both member states and the EU's resilience against cyber threats in the context of CSDP missions. So that's fantastic. This continues to build. They're spending more and more money on it. It involved the EU 27. By the way, I don't think the UK was actually involved in that one.
It's all right, I'm semi-speechless, Mike, because I smile as I watch this lot unfolding.
Yeah, absolutely. It's good fun. Right, so we move on. Moon of Alabama here highlighting what's going on in Yemen. Very little in the mainstream media about this. So we thought we'd mention this article. Great article. The headline is Yemen, US grants approval for genocide. Have a look at this. It says the genocide in Yemen is going to start tomorrow. That's today. 8 million are already on the brink of starvation. 18 out of 26 million Yemenis live in the mountainous heartlands, which are under control of the Houthi and their allies. They're surrounded by Saudi and UAE forces and the mercenaries. There's little agriculture. The only supply line from the outside world will soon be cut off and the people will starve. Even before the war, Yemen imported 90% of its staple food. 3 years of Saudi UAE bombing have destroyed local infrastructure and production. The ongoing war has already caused mass starvation and the outbreak of large cholera epidemic. The Yemeni coast is under blockade by Saudi and US naval forces, and the only supply lines coming in are UN and commercial deliveries through the Red Sea, Hodeida port. But that's going to be blocked. And basically, I suggest people read the rest of this article for more. But the fact is, this continues. I think it's not unfair to say that this is a genocide, and it does continue, and it's getting almost no coverage in the mainstream press. And really, we should be, I think,
ramping this up.
I think so, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes.
Bearing in mind, of course, that the British government is pushing in those munitions through to the warring factions. So, as always, we are complicit in the deaths.
Absolutely. Okay, quick advertisement for AV9 DVDs on sale on the UK Column website. 14-disc collection, $59.99, and that is a special price until the shipping date. So this is a pre-order if you order now. So get hold of a copy if you can. It was a fantastic weekend and hugely interesting talks.
Well, some outstanding talks, I think, is the answer to that. So encourage people to get hold of that if you can. Okay, well, we said we would do a little bit more of a follow-up on the Tommy Robinson demonstration. There was certainly quite a lot circulating on the internet over the weekend, and we've decided to pull out a couple of things to have a look at. Now, one of the reports that we had is that it was an independent news team that seemed to be only there for the purpose of reporting on violence and trouble.
Independent as in the independent newspaper?
Indeed,
yeah.
the Independent. We found this very interesting, but the reports that we've had is that it was an independent newspaper team that was there, and they were clearly focusing on anything and everything that could have been part of violence. So if somebody had fallen over, if somebody was pushed over, they were there. So I was interested to see this article. Tommy Robinson supporter cries and wails uncontrollably as he's handcuffed by police at far-right rally. Man pictured moments earlier holding a banner reading F Islam. And this is written by a gentleman called Chris Baines. There was a photograph well, actually, this is the video that was embedded into this article, and this is the supporter being handcuffed by police. And yes, he is wailing and protesting. And I have to say, if you watch the video, it's quite clear at one point that this is quite a lot of street theatre from this young man. But nevertheless, it's interesting as to why he's actually being handcuffed, because he's saying, I don't even know why you're doing this to me. And we'll come on to that a little bit more in a second. But here's part of the report from The Independent. It focuses on violence. 9 people were arrested after Saturday's protest turned violent, with demonstrators throwing bottles, metal barriers and beer at the police. No actual mention, Mike, at all about the sheer scale of the demonstration, and therefore you don't see the context of the violence. So if we look at the size of the demonstration itself, an ex-policeman said he estimated that there could have been 50,000 people there by the number of people packed into certain areas of Whitehall in particular, but they were also there in Trafalgar Square. I've had other reports of 25,000 people. So this doesn't get mentioned at all by the newspaper. Yeah. We simply focus on 9 people who were arrested after violence. And yes, of course, it's been reported to us that there were some, we'll call them wise boys there, who were clearly interested in the ruckus rather than what the overall demonstration was about. And I don't think we should be surprised that the BBC has followed through with this theme. So here we are, BBC News, police officers hurt at Free Tommy Robinson protest. And again, there's absolutely no mention of the scale of the protests or of the fact that the violence was absolutely tiny in proportion to the number of people there. A little bit of comment from the BBC. They said 5 police officers were injured in the demonstration in London in support of jailed ex-Defence League leader Tommy Robinson as that turned violent. Riot officers were deployed as, quote, hundreds of protesters blocked the roads around Trafalgar Square. 5 arrests were later made after Robinson supporters took over a sightseeing bus and missiles and smoke bombs were thrown. So it was very carefully crafted dialogue from the BBC because, yes, Trafalgar Square was one of the venues where there was an extremely large number of people, but also down towards Parliament and Whitehall, which they don't really want to talk about. So massive spin from the BBC. They don't really want to talk about this at all. And I wonder whether that is because on the overall scale of it, it was peaceful. But let's have a look at the young man who wrote the Independent story. Here he is. I know I can be told off for this, but my goodness, they do look young these days, Mike. Yeah. I think he's over 16. But what does he have to say? Well, he says this. He's talking about the man who we could see pinned by the police just a few moments earlier. The man whose identity is not known is not thought to have been arrested. It's not clear why he was pursued and handcuffed, but one of the officers can be heard speaking to him about the Islamophobic banner and asking him for his details. He said it wasn't his flag. He didn't turn up with it. Somebody else. It was somebody else, honest gov. But the Metropolitan Police said it could not confirm any details about the incident. I found that comment interesting, Mike, because if somebody's been pinned by the police against railings and handcuffed, presumably they've arrested him, and therefore they should have full details about what took place in the incident. So there's a number of things about the reporting, but we were able to get some comment from a former police officer about the policing effort for this demonstration, and the comment was that the size of the policing effort for the size of the demonstration was very small, and it's been suggested to us that this was because there was no earlier police intelligence that there was going to be any planned violence. So I found that an interesting comment. The police mixed freely with the crowd in their normal uniforms, and this was going on right throughout the period, even though in some locations there was this minor violence. So the police obviously felt comfortable to be amongst the crowd and without any form of riot gear. There was a mix of people there, and certainly we've seen some video ourselves. There were black people, elderly people, there were children, all mixing freely with the crowd. Well, we've talked about the limited violence, but what one commentator said is that he saw the crowd becoming, agitated when police came and snatched people who didn't appear to be doing anything. And this was quite an interesting comment, but even people there in the crowd themselves admitted there were a small number of aggressive, what they described as hooligans. Now, we know that the crowds were being watched from a number of different police CCTV centres, and we know that forward intelligence officers, these are the ones in blue, were tasked with apprehending individuals considered to possibly be going to create trouble.
So pre-crime, you mean?
Thought crime. Well, we've got some questions here, Mike, and I think this is one of the reasons why it's good to talk about this, because I think the police would say they know about individuals who are already involved in trouble. They saw them there, or they thought they saw them identified through video, and they then apprehend them in order to preempt violence.
Yeah, but I'm sorry, people there's a presumption of innocence in this country, and to pick somebody off the street who has not yet committed a crime on the basis of something that they might do in the future, this is totalitarian.
Okay, and I don't have a problem with that. This is just giving you the comment from former police officer. Those officers, the forward intelligence officers, were supported by plainclothes, I think they're called territorial support group officers, who were actually mixed amongst the crowd. Now, when I hear that, I then say, is it possible some of these were agitating themselves? So there's another question there which can be put forward, but I'm taking this analysis on face value. Now, we know that arrests would need to be under Section 9 of the Magistrates' Court Act with appropriate notes for that arrest, and somebody could be arrested and then de-arrested later, and possibly that happened to the gentleman who was in the video that we've just looked at the screenshot, and anybody who was handcuffed, that would be in accordance with Section 117 of PACE.
Well, that's where the handcuffing happens without there actually being an arrest. So that's Section 117 is about the it gives the power of limited force, I suppose.
In order to restrain somebody.
Yes.
Right, okay. So a number of things going on there, but we felt it appropriate now that a little bit of time has gone and we've had more information in to report on what seemed to take place in that demonstration, and of course very little reporting from so-called mainstream media. But something quite exceptional took place during the demonstration, and we understand that a young lady handed out at least 2,000 leaflets in which she was encouraging people to be aware of John Wedger and the excellent information he's given about the cover-up of child abuse. And of course that child abuse is not simply Asian child abuse, it extends to a full spectrum of people.
So this letter has come from a group calling themselves Political Blackout. They're on Facebook if you want to find them. So the leaflet highlighting John Wedger, a former Scotland Yard CID officer, as they put it, blowing the whistle on what's going on within the police regarding child sex trafficking here in the UK. The leaflet says, what you're reading is correct. Our establishment, i.e. the political elite, are complicit with these grooming gangs. This is the reason why there's a media blackout. It's ordered not to protect Tommy, not to protect us, not to protect the grooming gangs, but to protect them, the establishment. And this is the key point. This is what I find particularly pleasing about this, because the target is correct here.
Yes, absolutely. So we were very encouraged to hear this, because it means that the message is now getting out that if we're going to solve what's going on with the grooming gangs, then we've got to look at the establishment, the political establishment, the wider establishment, which are facilitating. They are allowing this to happen. They're covering it up. And on this very subject, we received a call as we were preparing the news this morning, telling us that there's been another case in South Yorkshire of a, now we'll say a young girl, previously an underage girl, who reported rape in a family situation. The police turned up at the door. They simply asked the older man if he did it. He said no, and that is the end of it. So the man was not taken in for formal questioning. The police just said to him, well, did you rape her or not? He said no, of course not, Gov. And the police then walked away. And the family members who are, of course, supporting the rape victim herself are just, well, they actually don't have any words, Mike, because they cannot believe how the police can do this. But of course, this is exactly what was happening with the Asian grooming gangs. So we've got the same sort of response from the police, simply continuing. And we'll add to that within the South Yorkshire police area as well, we've got another ongoing court case that we cannot report on in detail, but we can tell you that the judges refused to allow a video with evidence of child abuse to be entered into court. So we have a video which is about a child being abused. The judge has simply said, I am not allowing that evidence into court, and he's then running a case where the key evidence can't be shown in court. Now, of course, the guidance from the Family Law Division is that the interests of the child are paramount, but apparently not in this particular family court case. And of course, no press, no members of the public, but the judge solving the problem of rape and child abuse by saying, well, if I don't see the evidence, then I think we can run this court in a satisfactory way. I'll add to that in that particular case, we've had connivance from the local authority, their social services, their child protection unit, and CAFCAS and the legal teams, because they have all had copies of the video showing the abuse. So at the moment, Mike, we have a cover-up through all those individuals. And this is the reason for people to be aware that if we focus on one area of the community, we miss the root cause of the problem, which is the wider political establishment closing ranks to cover up child abuse. And a big thank you to our viewer who sent us a copy of this very interesting letter. This is, where are we? I've lost it now. This has been produced by Baroness Goldie, and she was asked a question in the House of Lords, wasn't able to answer it at the time, so she responds. So let me see whether we can have a look at some of this. Just need to call it up on screen so I can read it. It says, Dear Molly, during the debate on the EU withdrawal bill on Monday the 30th of April, you raised a point on the subject of what enforceable child protection measures will be in place once we are. Oh my goodness, I've only just noticed that.
There's an error in that letter.
There's an error. This is fake news. Well, it's a real letter, so I'll start again. What enforceable child protection measures will be in place once we are presumably no longer an EU member state? I'm sorry I was unable to respond to you at the time, and I promised to write to you. Let me reassure you that the UK meets its obligations under the UN CRC, we'll come on to that, through a mixture of legislative and policy initiatives. For example, in England, the rights and best interests of children are protected through the Children Act 1989, the Adoption and Children Act 2002, and the Children Act 2004, as well as other legislative and administrative measures. If a public body is not acting in accordance with the relevant legislation, they may be challenged by way of judicial review in the normal way through the courts. Existing remedies are available if a court finds that the legislation or a policy is contrary to normal public law principles. The UK's exit from the EU will not affect the protection of children's rights in accordance with the UN rules, as these are already protected through existing domestic legislation and administrative measures. I hope you'll find this letter helpful. Well, isn't it astonishing, Mike, that we've just talked about just one case going on in Yorkshire at the moment where the state is absolutely not protecting children. We've warned, of course, about the number of children disappearing from the care system. We've warned about the disappearing Syrian children. But we've got the former leader of Conservatives in Scotland saying, don't worry, the British state has got it all under control. And if you wonder what she was referring to, well, here is the document itself. So this is the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child. And this is a summary sheet. But it's quite interesting to have a look at what they're talking about here. One of the things it says, I noticed Article 36, top right, other forms of exploitation. Governments must protect children from all other forms of exploitation. For example, the exploitation of children for political activities by the media or for medical research. Just caught my eye, that one, but I thought how interesting that the government's involved in all those things to start off with, never mind more direct abuse. So here are the rules. What they set out very clearly is that children should be protected from abuse in all its forms. Children should be allowed to speak out. Children in care should be allowed to see their families. Children should not be tortured. Virtually every one of the major rules, we can now say that the UK government is breaching those rules, but within the House of Lords, clearly clueless as to what's really going on.
Yes. Now, Independent here reporting teenage suicides in London rising by 107%, more than 4 times the national rate. This is according to new figures which have been produced by this organisation, the Brent Centre for Young People. So the Independent report saying new figures show self-inflicted deaths among Londoners aged between 10 and 19 have more than doubled since 2013, rising by 107% in the 3 years to 2016 from 14 to 29, while across England and Wales the equivalent number increased by 24%. Experts attribute the sharp rise to the overpressured environment facing teenagers in the city and a feeling amongst those in the capital's deprived neighbourhoods that there's no hope for their education and job prospects. The figures compiled by the Brent Centre for young people through Freedom of Information requests show that among London's 10 to 24 age group, the number of suicides rose by 85% over 3 years, from 47 to 87, compared to 11% increase in suicides in England and Wales, up from 466 to 518. Frankly, I find 500 children committing suicide in England and Wales to be a disgraceful statistic, and it is a reflection of the type of lifestyles that are being forced on people these days, not only through the media, but as this report highlights, the fact that this government, and in fact no government for the last 30 years, has offered any hope of career, of
stability and prosperity to young people.
We're being offered retail jobs, coffee serving and shelf stacking. There's no hope for young people, and it needs to be reversed very quickly.
Needs to be reversed, and that means we all need to do things. Now, one lady who stood up to be counted in a very big way is Christina England. Have a look on the internet if you've not come across Christina before. She's produced 2 books now warning about the dangers of vaccinations, but she's produced this really excellent article, Medical Kidnap, where she's written in Health Impact News, and she's talking about the sheer number of children disappearing from the UK care system. Now, why is this important? Well, the information is now starting to come to the surface. We know things are being suppressed in the so-called mainstream media, but we now have a number of really good, really well-informed journalists producing information elsewhere. So I encourage you to go and have a look at that latest article by Christina England.
Fresh Start Foundation.
Yes, and Fresh Start Foundation goes on. So this is the next event, Aberdeen, Saturday the 23rd of June. Robert Green will be one of the people attending that. And I have to say that reports from the events that have been done so far are all exceptionally encouraging, Mike. People attending, very cautious, and that's to be understood because, of course, abuse survivors are attending, and this is a very delicate matter, but absolutely picking up on the fact that it's no good expecting the Scottish government or the Westminster government to be actually taking the lead with stopping the abuse of children and bringing perpetrators to justice. It requires people to do it themselves, and they are beginning to see the sense in people coming together to run their own inquiries and to bring people to justice through common law court procedures. So I think this is very, very successful. If you can get to that Aberdeen event, the address is the Station Hotel, 78 Guild Street, Aberdeen, AB11 6GN. So that's Saturday the 23rd of June, starting at 11 a.m. And before we leave you today, we'll just pop this up on screen. It's why doesn't the UK column? This is a question that we get asked on a fairly regular basis. It can be followed by a number of different things. Why don't we report on a particular subject? Why don't we start a protest movement for Melanie Shaw? Why don't we do a lot of things? So we know that there are many people out there becoming quite agitated, I think, as they see events unfolding in the country. And an immediate response is to contact the UK column to ask us why we don't follow through on their idea. And the immediate response to that is because we have enough on our plates at the moment doing what we're doing. So this is not a put down. It's simply to say that if you have an idea and it's a good idea and it doesn't involve violence or hate, then do it. It's up to you to pick the ball up and run with it.
If we'll give out as much support as we possibly can.
If we can give support, we will. But it is simply unrealistic for people to think that the UK column can produce the amount of news that we do, plus the other events, and at the same time simply drop everything to pick up an initiative which you may think is a good idea. So we're delighted that people are now coming up with ideas as to what can be done to overturn the criminality and the state of the British government at the moment. But we've got to say, if it's your idea, then start to do something yourself to push it forward. Even speaking to a few other people to discuss it can produce remarkable responses as people get excited about the idea, offer encouragement, or perhaps can say, well, we could do that in a slightly different way and it would be easier. So not a put down from the UK column, but we are having to say we're simply unable to take on every initiative that people would want. And also we're not to be swayed onto one particular topic of reporting. We think we've done pretty well reporting across a spectrum over the last 10 years, and we're going to continue to do that. That's it for today. Thanks very much for joining us. We will be back at the same time tomorrow. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.